Okay, so in this video, what I want to do is go through a Devuan install, a minimal Devuan install. And this is going to be extremely similar to the Debian install with a few slight differences. Obviously, the main difference is the whole point of Devuan is they have taken, well, they forked an official fork of Debian and stripped out anything to do with systemd. They do keep like elognd, which has been separated from systemd, but it is a Debian that is systemd free, similar to the way that Artix is a systemd free version of Arch Linux. So I just wanted to go through a minimal install of Devuan and kind of run through some of the bare basics that you may want to know. So we're going to start our machine here. And the latest stable version, which is based off of Debian Bookworm, is Devuan Daedalus, and this is the 5.0. This is the latest net install image. It won't detect, if you're using Virt Manager, it won't detect Devuan. So actually I don't think they have Devuan now. So I just put in Debian 12 because that's basically what it's based off of. And I'll go ahead and give this guy, go ahead and give this guy my standard 4 gig and a couple of more cores there, and give it 50 in case we want to play with it again later. I'm going to do like I did before. We're going to customize. I want to set this up with UEFI because it does actually work pretty well with UEFI. So we'll begin that installation. I'm going to move this over to a different workstation. Oops, what did I do? Oh, moved it to the wrong workstation. There we go. Now this is the installer, which again is very similar to the Debian with a few extra options, but it's practically the same thing as Debian's. So I'll do the expert install. And we'll choose our language like we do. United States, United States. I don't need, they do have options obviously for accessibility, but I don't need either of those, so we'll do American English for the keyboard. We'll detect the installation. It detects it just fine. Well, the install media. And then I don't need any of the extra things here, so we'll go ahead and let that run through. Let it go ahead and detect the network. We configure our network. Just go ahead and do auto configuration unless you have a special setup. Alright, then we'll just do, I'll just keep it as dev1, that's fine. I'm actually not going to log in as root, allow login as root, so that it will automatically set my user with sudo privileges, and I don't have to deal with going in there and setting that up manually. And then we do network time protocol. You want to go ahead and set that up. That basically will allow you to get your time synced through the network. Detect our disks. Partition. You can go ahead and just do a manual. I usually like to just go ahead and do manual because I set up my disks on my own anyway usually. So, you know, we'll just go ahead and do manual this time around. We want to create a new one. We want to do GPT. Create a new partition. I will do 1 gig for my EFI. You'll set this up as the EFI partition. And then I will create another partition, give it about a 2 gigabyte for the swap. And then the rest will just be the rest of the disk for ext4. And obviously you can pick a different one if you want, but I just go ahead and use, I mean, they even have Butterfest and all that, but I just go ahead and do ext4 with pretty much everything. It's stable, it's fast, so, but that's what I use on my main systems, other than my Bazelite install, which it defaults to Butterfest because of the snapshots and all that. And so that's ready to go. We'll write our changes and we will install. Now here is where it's wanting to know if you want to go ahead and set up the symlinked bin and sbin, basically the merged user. And I go ahead and do that just because I believe the next version is going to default to that anyway. So I go ahead and say yes here so that those will be symlinked. That will, you shouldn't run into any, if you run into some sort of compatibility issue, especially if you have a separate partition for the USR directory, you may not want to do that. But for most use cases, you'll want to go ahead and set that up because that's basically going to be the default next time around anyway. It's pulling in just the base system. I've noticed sometimes the Devuan repository servers can be a little bit slower than the Debian ones. So every once in a while, they seem to load a little slower, at least from where I'm at. Now, I'm probably not choosing the right server, but sometimes it's fast and sometimes I'll have some slowness. So I guess it depends on where you go. Again, since this is based off Debian Bookworm, it's going to have the 6.1 kernel as the default kernel. But as with Bookworm and Debian, you can set up backport and get a newer kernel via backports without, it's pretty much the same process. So you can get a newer kernel very easily. I've even used like Xanmod with it, and that worked fine. So I don't need to scan for any. We're going to use network. We're going to do United States. I just usually pick that first one there is usually okay. A lot of these other ones I've tried have been slower, so I just go with the default there. Again, every once in a while, the servers will run a little slow, but lately it hasn't been too bad. Again, we'll do non-free, allow that. I'm not too worried about the source repositories. And here's where you want to make, anyway, like to make sure I have backport software repository enabled. That way we can pull in newer kernels and firmwares and things like that. Yeah, the repositories are running pretty fast now, so that doesn't really seem to be much of an issue. And as with Debian, again, when you get to this spot, you can decide how you want to set your system up. If you want it minimal, if you want to use a desktop environment. I believe that Devuan defaults to XFCE, whereas Debian will default to GNOME. But you can obviously pick whatever you want or nothing at all, which is kind of how we're going to set this one up. I'm not worried about package survey. That's again just some telemetry stuff. And you'll see that they do have GNOME in their repositories, but they default, and I think they recommend XFCE. But we're not going to do any of those. I usually do SSH as well, but I don't need that on a VM. And it'll pull in just the very base system. And that was relatively quick as well, so that's definitely not an issue. Now here is obviously one of the major differences between Devuan and Debian. You can choose what init system you want. Technically you can do it in Debian as well, but I've had issues trying to switch very easily the init system in standard Debian. So if you want Debian but don't want to deal with systemd, Devuan is the best choice to go with. I almost always just go with sysvinit, mainly because it seems to work best with Devuan. You can obviously do OpenRC or run it. Run it works a little bit differently in Devuan from what I can tell than it does in Void Linux. I don't really recommend that. OpenRC seems to work pretty well in Devuan, but if I'm going to use Devuan, I want to use sysvinit. That really does bring back to me the memories of the old Debian days when Debian used sysvinit. So it is kind of just the way Debian used to be. So I always go with sysvinit. I'm fairly competent in sysvinit, and it's something I've used for many years in the past, and it's nice to see it still being used here. So I almost always choose sysvinit with Devuan, and their implementation is spot on. So go ahead and get sysvinit up and running. We install grub. Lord willing, if it doesn't hang on me. Usually doesn't take that long. There we go. This, if you are having an issue with grub on a specific motherboard, like my laptop, for example, I have to do this where I forced grub into the EFI removable media path. I have to do that on because my laptop is funky, and if I don't do that, it sometimes won't detect grub or boot into grub. So generally speaking, you usually don't have to do this, but it also doesn't hurt to do it. This will just automatically update your EFI to boot into Devuan, like if you have multiple operating systems installed. Now you might say no here if you don't want that to be the default, but we're just going to have one operating system on this VM, so that's no big deal. And again, OS Prober is if you have other either distributions or Windows or anything like that, that will allow grub to detect those and set those up for you, but we're not going to have any of those either on here. And again, usually when I'm dual booting, I set up an EFI partition for each distribution that I'm using, so I don't usually allow one to control the other. As far as grub goes, they all have their own partition for EFI, and they all have their own grub for EFI. Now, I actually usually don't go ahead and finish. I like to do what I do in Debian as well, is execute a shell. And that'll bring us here where you can type in Chroot/target, and that basically Chroots us into the install, and I can install some extra packages before the reboot. So I can do apt install like git, fish, neovim, and I like to use network manager and go ahead and have that set up on the first boot. And that way I don't have an issue. Like, you can go ahead and not do network manager on that one, but if you want to switch to network manager later, you'd have to go into the etc network and interfaces and disable those interfaces after you install network manager. Whereas if I set it up this way, I don't have to worry about doing that. So that's why we're just going to go ahead and set it up this way. And there we go. So we should be set and ready to reboot. It'll install sudo. It should ask me if I want to do UTC time, which I do. You won't want to do this if you're using like Windows, but I'm not going to have a Windows on this system, so UTC works fine. And now it'll reboot. And there we go. Now we have Devuan installed. A very minimal Devuan. And again, you see that it boots really fast. This is using sys via init, and it boots just pretty much just as fast as what run it did on void. Not that system D, especially on a minimal system, boots fast as well, but this does seem to at least appear to boot faster. And I do believe it uses a lot less RAM and such like that. So I can go ahead and log in. Oh. Let's reconfigure. Basically, I do this just so that I can get a little larger font on the console, so it's a little easier to see. Usually go with Terminus. You can do 16 by 32, but sometimes that can be too big, so let's just try the 14 by 28. That doesn't look too bad, I don't think. And so now we can, again, you know, we have 6.1. We have our partitions set up. Get htop installed. What is this running memory wise? 101 megabyte on just a fresh boot. So I'm going to get NeoFetch installed. Again, if you're not very familiar with sysvinit, it may, a lot of systems or a lot of services with Devuan work similar to what it does in Debian. It'll automatically set things up when you install them. But if you are curious about the services, you can do sudo, what is that? Sudo service status all, and I'm just going to pipe that through less. Oh, if I can get it right. Pipe that through less, and this will show you the services that are available and that are running. The ones with the plus there run. Like I say, I've got my dbus, elognd, crons running, network manager, and you can kind of see what's what. Now, if you're wanting to control services, the best thing to do really is just look at the man page for the update RCD. Read through this man page. You really should, if you're not familiar with systemd and how services are used with systemd on like Devuan. And this will give you most of the information you need to at least get started on setting up services, run levels, scripts, all that good stuff is here in the man page to kind of get your feet wet on how to use these things. Again, you see how to set up services on those sort of things. And that is pretty much it. So we got Devuan running here. Again, it will work similar for the back ports, so you can do let's see, we can do, what is that, firmware Linux. So that will actually pull in, just like in Debian, it'll pull in the backported kernel, which will be a more up-to-date kernel, and the firmware as well, which will work if you have a newer system that will need those things to work. Like, for example, my system uses a newer AMD video card, not on the VM obviously, but on my main system, so I have to run the newer firmware, or my refresh rates and things like that don't work correctly because this video card I have came out quite a bit after the 6.1 kernel, and the firmware is used in Bookworm or Daedalus. So this will set up a newer kernel and everything and firmwares for you. So let's get that booted up, and it'll automatically set everything up just like it does in Debian. So if you know your way around Debian, you can do Devuan very easily. So we're, yeah, still using the 6.11.10, so a much newer kernel. So let's reboot that thing. Put a reboot on that thing. There we go. Yeah, see, that just boots up so fast. And there we go. We got Dev1 set up for newer kernel and newer firmwares and all that. And from this point, you can install again whatever you want, except CE, i3, however you want to set up your system. You have a blank slate with no systemd whatsoever. They strip all systemd packages out, and so you can have a nice, beautiful Debian without systemd that is very fast and very stable. If this video was helpful and you enjoyed it, please like it, and I hope you subscribe to the channel, and maybe we'll toy with some of these VMs again later and set up some window managers or desktop environments and things like that. And I do appreciate everybody for watching. Thank you.